Dear class, so on the topic of tragedy, Greek versus Shakespearean, much ink has been spilt, as they used to say. Not a phrase I've thought about much for a long time. In fact, when I first heard it, when I suppose I was a schoolboy, I wondered why scholars were supposed to have been so clumsy with their inkwells. And it only occurs to me now that's not what is meant by much ink has been spilled. It just means a lot of ink has been used. No longer, of course, we no longer use inkwells. We use some ink, but it seems inappropriate to say that much ink has been spilt on this topic, although a great deal of writing certainly has. And as part of our course, I'm asking you to consider what it is that connects the two different writers and writings of each module in the course, so that we may attempt to patch together an idea of what a Western tradition might be. But I'm not so much interested in your trying to find bridges between the two different works that you're contemplating, as to ask questions about what it is that might connect them or not connect them, and how it is that we might weave together the tangled, distant threads of culture that could be called a Western tradition. On the subject of tragedy, of course, of Greek tragedy, we have some guidance from Aristotle as to what the proper proceeding was for a Greek tragedian in his compositions, which do not all really conform to Aristotle's instructions. As fascinating as those are, we don't have a handbook for Shakespearean tragedy, but we can see enormous differences. And that's not so much what I want you to look at. If you're curious on that issue, there's a series of short talks or videos that I made for a different class, imagining Aristotle himself visiting the Globe Theatre and seeing a production of Shakespeare's, I think it's actually a production of Othello, of a Shakespearean play, and being invited by myself to respond to it. In fact, we go on successive nights, something that you couldn't do in the Theatre of Dionysus in Athens, to see productions. And Aristotle warms increasingly to Shakespearean tragedy, and he finds Shakespeare's insight into personality extremely compelling and admirable, and he worries about the absence of masks. In fact, when Othello makes his first entrance, Aristotle leans over to me and says, "Ah, at last, a mask." And I have to quickly, whisperingly explain to him, not so. Although, of course, in the old days of blackface actors playing Othello, that's exactly what it was. So if you're curious about those videos, there are 3 of them, I think, you'll find them under an odd title which owes its name to an actor, an amateur actor, an undergraduate actor called Adel Abdallah, who was in a production of mine at Cambridge 55 years ago, however long it is now, where he played a character in Bertolt Brecht's play Galileo, Das Leben des Galileo, The Life of Galileo, in which Adele, I forget which character he plays, had to utter the name Aristotle. But this was a torture for Adele, who basically said it as Harry Stottle. And we didn't want to try and change him too much, because we loved the concept of Harry Stottle too much to want to do away with it. So my little lectures are about how Harry Stottle goes in my company to the Globe, and what he thinks about Shakespearean tragedy. Now, that's not what our short meditation is supposed to primarily be about. What interests me is the question, what is this Western tradition that we should make so much of it? Does it even exist in any traditional way that is a throughput from earliest days till now, or is it all purely fragmentary? And what I would like you to do, I think, is ask any questions that come to your mind with regard, and leave them as questions. I much prefer questions to answers. Leave as questions the puzzlement that you may feel, as I do, at the idea of a Western tradition, something that you're no better positioned to describe than I am. I may have read a bit more than you, although only a fraction of what there is to be read that could compose the Western tradition. But the idea of the tradition is more contained in ideas outside of the works of literature that we might be looking at. The Western cultural tradition it's extremely various, and if we count the Greeks among its avatars, those who have begun it for us, I think we'd have to ask ourselves whether we hold the gods in the same esteem anymore. Is that a part? Is piety a part of the Western tradition? If we have largely abandoned it over the last 150 years or more, is it still therefore traditional, or is it an older tradition which is now defunct? What do we feel about the gods? The Greek dramatists themselves felt very different things. Aeschylus, whom you call Aeschylus, who we shall be reading at the end of the semester, felt that the gods had sanctioned the existence of Athens, and a very important thing that was, and very important were the urban elements of culture that brought to an end the wild world of vendettas that existed in Homeric Greece and other parts of the world. So his plays are an homage to the great significance of the gods. Sophocles, his successor, was himself not so sure, and not so sure of the benign nature of the gods, although he acknowledges that they're there, or at least, for instance, the chorus in the Antigone does, and in others of his plays, but the characters don't always do so, and there is a darkness to Sophocles' understanding of the meaning of human life. Call no man happy till he's dead. That puts in at some distance the reverence for the divine that you would find, for instance, in Christianity, where we can't say, as a good Christian, call no man happy till he's dead, since the space of living is the one that will determine whether he or she can expect happiness after he or she dies. And then the third of the great trio of Greek dramatists reaches us as Euripides, who is very doubtful that the gods are even there. So even within Greek tragedy, we have a whole a spectrum of belief and doubt when it comes to the gods. I say that because the question is how much is the position of the gods in the play we read in Antigone an essential prop in the Western tradition, and if so, is it there in Shakespeare? Shakespeare is poised as well, perhaps a little like Sophocles, between belief and doubt. I think that were we as a culture completely to resolve our own uncertainty about the divine, either to surrender entirely to our faith or to abandon completely a belief in the divine and the supernatural. Either way, we would no longer have so much use for Shakespeare, which a glorious figure in the history of literature, whose achievements, both in creating stories and in creating characters within those stories and in creating unforgettable verse, those achievements cannot be washed away. However, his language presents enough of a difficulty to discourage many people. And beyond that is the much greater question of, what is Shakespeare telling us? Is he telling us that we should put ourselves in the hands of the gods, or is he telling us that we have individual power to forge our own fate, as many characters in his plays claim? And where Shakespeare stands on that question, where he stands generally on the question of religion, has been hugely debated. Much ink has been spilt on this subject. Was he a closet Catholic? Was he a closet atheist? Was he, as many, including myself, believe, a closet pagan? Were the old gods more real to him from his Warwickshire countryside upbringing than the Christian pantheon? He loved ancient Rome because we had there a pagan world with pagan gods, and it seems to me that that was where he feels most at home. But shall we say that the Western tradition includes an enduring paganism? What shall we say about a belief in these two plays, the Antigone and Othello? And I would be happiest if you just asked the questions as they came to you. Is this a tradition? Is that a tradition? You don't have to answer this. You're not responsible for founding a whole new concept of the Western tradition, whatever that might mean for us, whatever use that might be for us. But I think since that is the premise of our course, and it's an interesting one, we should be constantly asking ourselves, what is this Western tradition that we've inherited? How should we look at it? How does it express itself in the books that we're going to read? 10 books chosen out of, 12 books maybe. Forget how many little modules we've got, 6 I think, out of the immense library of literature that we could draw on to ask the question, Western tradition, where are you? I want you to ask yourself a few questions and pass those on to me so that you may illuminate my darkness a little, because I have no answers in this regard. You may simply want to say that the power of the creative imagination, this is the Western tradition. We certainly feel it in Sophocles, who has imagined the story of Antigone most formidably, dramatically, and with the help of the chorus shaped our thoughts about its meaning. And Shakespeare, of course, who, if he was somehow found to have descended from a spaceship and walked fully clothed into Stratford-on-Avon as a small child, none of those of us who love Shakespeare will be entirely surprised. His gifts seem supernatural, not least of which is to have forged the language that we now speak, a slightly richer version of it, but also with all the plain words in there and used in their most powerful way, in the most powerful way that you could imagine using them to be or not to be. That is the question. None of his contemporaries were able to frame anything in a way that endures as our modern speech as completely as he did. How could he do this? He's sitting there with a scroll in front of him and some of the ink ready to be spilt and a candle, out brief candle. Well, before his went out, he reframed for us 400 years of the language that is most famed throughout our planet. So I will welcome all your questions. I look forward to reading them, and please stay safe and don't spill any ink.